Okay, this video is going to cover section 1.1, which introduces us to some formulas, the calculator, and number types. So at some point a long time ago, you learned about coordinate grids and how you have a y-axis and an x-axis. And then this point right here in the middle, 0, 0, is called the origin. Any point has the x coordinate first, then the y coordinate. So 4, 2, you would go to 4 on the y, or 4 on the x, 2 on the y, and plot a point where they meet. The quadrants start in quadrant 1, and then go counterclockwise for 2, 3, and 4. If a point falls on an axis, it's not in a quadrant. Your calculator, so a graphing calculator, will actually graph things in the coordinate grid. So depending on what you have where, it'll graph a coordinate grid. And the window button up here gives you the lowest x, the highest x, how you want it to count, the lowest y, the highest y, and how you want it to count. So if I wanted to change the window, maybe I see something like, I want my window written like this. Just like the points, it's saying the x first and then the y, and then it goes right in order. So negative 10, 10, 1, negative 5, 5, 1. Now, if you look at the numbers on this one, the y numbers right here on this side are further apart than the other numbers. Depending on the type of calculator you have, it might look a little bit different, but that's in general how that window button works. Now let's talk about some different types of numbers. So there's all kinds of numbers in the world. They are either imaginary or real. An imaginary number has an I, and a real number is anything that can be written as a decimal. That says decimal, even though I know there's no way in heck anybody can read that. Decimal. So 3.2 is a real number because it's a decimal. 3.2i would be imaginary. Real numbers can then be broken down even more into irrational and rational. Rational numbers can be written as a fraction. Irrational numbers can't. So for example, 2/3 is a fraction. As a decimal, it goes on and on forever, but because it can be written as a fraction, it's rational. Irrationals can't, so they're like pi, e, a square root that's not a perfect square. Those are all irrational. Then some rational numbers are integers, meaning they're positives and negatives, but no decimals and fractions. Then the integers break into whole numbers, which start at 0 and go up, but you have no negatives. And then you have what's called the natural numbers, which start at 1 and go up. No negatives and no 0. So if you're going through the homework and it's saying, it gives you the number negative 57.35, and it wants you to classify, well, it's negative, so it can't be those two. It has a decimal, so it can't be that one. It could be 57 and 35 hundredths, so it's rational and real. Now let's say we did the number 7. Well, the number 7 fits into all of these. So once it's down, it's everything above it on that flow chart. All right, calculator practice. So on your graphing calculator, if you're ever trying to get out of things, you're going to hit second, which is the blue button, and mode, which is right next to it. That'll quit back to the main screen. To enter a square root, you hit second, and then the x squared button. So the blue button and then x squared. And then you type 23, and it'll spit out the answer of 4.796. Okay? a cubed root. So when you have that little 3 right there, we're going to hit the math button and go down to number 4. It'll put that 3 there for us automatically. So once you do that, you hit enter, and we get 4.431. And then the 4th root, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use math, but this time we're going to choose 5 because it has an N, so we can type our own number there. So we type the 4 and we type the 12, and it gives us 1.861. When you're typing fractions on a calculator that also have operations, you want the top and the bottom to happen separately. And the calculator does order of operations. So you need to put parentheses on the top and the bottom. So parentheses 3.8 minus 1.4, close parentheses. And then put the denominator in parentheses as well. Otherwise, it's going to do the division first, and you will not get the answer you're looking for. All right. And same for this. You want to check your parentheses and make sure you have everything. So parentheses 4 minus 1 squared plus negative 3 minus 2 squared gives us our answer, 5.831. Now, rounding, it'll be, the problems will tell you what to round to. Otherwise, you pick. It doesn't matter. Just don't forget that, like here, we had 0, 9. So that 9 tells the 0 to go up. A lot of people just cut it off. Don't forget, you might have to round up. Again, some of you may already know how to use these calculators, but other people don't. So that's why we're going over it really quickly. Pi on this calculator, you hit the second button and then the caret, which is right above the division sign. So you get 3 pi, and then to get an exponent, you hit the caret. So hit that again, and it goes up to the 4. Now use the arrow to come out of the exponent and write minus 9. And you can either do caret 2 or you can hit the squared button. They will give you the same thing. So 211.227. So there's how you can use the calculator for a bunch of things. Pythagorean theorem. Way back somewhere in your childhood, you learned a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That means that if you square the legs of a right triangle and add them together, it will equal the hypotenuse, or the side across from the hypotenuse, squared. So if I were to do this second one over here, I'm going to start with the second one because we know A and B, we know the legs. So 6 squared plus 8 squared equals y squared. 6 squared is 36. 8 squared is 64. 36 plus 64 is 100. To undo a squared, you take the square root. So y equals 10. If you know the hypotenuse, you can just subtract. So you have 2 ways. One is to say, hey, I know I'm subtracting instead. So I do 13 squared minus 12 squared equals x squared. Where that comes from is if I said 12 squared plus x squared equals 13 squared. To get this on the other side, I would just subtract 12 squared from both sides and the x's alone. So I just did a shortcut. It's up to you what step you need to write first. Now let's do the math. 13 squared is 169. 12 squared is 144. 169 minus 144 is 25. And then the square root of 25 is 5. Now these examples have problems that come out even. I picked special triples on purpose. Most answers will come out as a decimal. They'll be irrational. They don't always work out perfectly. All right. So now we have the distance formula, the midpoint formula, and the slope formula. This just says if I put 2 points, so here's 1 point, here's another point, the distance formula will tell me how far it is between those 2 points. That's the distance formula. The midpoint formula will tell me the coordinate of the point exactly in the middle. And then the slope, it's kind of the steepness. It tells me the rise over the run. And that's how I go into it. Now again, every point is x comma y. So when you have 2 points, you pick one and you name that 1. And you name the other one 2. And that's where these little sub 1s and 2s come from. So now that we have that, I'm going to put down 2 points. And we're going to find those three things. So 1 point is going to be negative 8, 4. The other point is going to be 3, negative 2. So if I call this one 1, this is x1, y1, this is x2, y2, and I just plug them in. So for this first one, I would do negative 8 minus 3 squared and 4 minus negative 2 squared. You can type it in the calculator just like that. So if I do that, square root, negative 8 minus 3 squared plus 4 minus negative 2. So one thing I wanted to point out is minus negative. The minus you're going to use in the operations. The negative, you want to use the one down by the period. Otherwise, it'll say syntax error. So the minus and the negative are two different features. So the distance is 12.53. Okay, the midpoint is like finding the average. So we're going to add the x's. So negative 8 plus 3 is negative 5. Divided by 2 is negative 2.5. That's my x coordinate of the midpoint. Then we do the same thing with the y's. 4 plus negative 2 is 2. And 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that's the coordinate of the point directly in between our 2 points. Finally, you have the slope. Same thing. We're just going to take those and plug them in. So y's go on top. X's go on the bottom. Minus a negative is plus. So 4 plus 2 is 6. Negative 8 minus 3 is negative 11. And that's as far as I can go. So that's the slope. So that's just some quick stuff. These formulas will be provided for you. You just have to know what each is for. Let me know if you have any questions.